All right. Well, really excited to have Geoff Gilton here today.
Yeah.
Going to share a little bit more about the world of security and how can we be looking at doing AI the right way,
Yeah.
implementing in a really secure manner. So, Geoff, fired up to have you with us, and you have such a wealth of experience that I know you're going to be able to share with the folks. So, I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me.
All right. So, I think where we'll kick off today is we were just having an interesting conversation around shadow IT.
Hmm.
And if organizations aren't adopting quick enough to um, get their teams the AI
Yeah.
and the solutions that they're looking for, oftentimes they might go and just use a free ChatGPT subscription or something and the like. Why is that bad? I know we're starting at a high level, but what's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, if you're not being explicit about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable use, then you're kind of putting yourself at risk, right? And at this point, I think pretty much everybody in their personal lives is getting exposed to AI in some form or fashion. Um, so People are starting to be able to use it personally, and they're going to feel constrained if they can't use it
Of
in
course, yeah.
in the workplace. So getting out in front of that is really critical. And I kind of think about it as, you kind of go back to the last massive transformational technology period was 30 years ago, and this thing called the internet, right? And there's so many parallels, but um, but AI is that much more impactful. Um, so it is just a tool, but it's an extremely powerful tool. So it can do all sorts of things. Um, and I think how to manage it and govern it is still emerging.
Yeah.
So, um, but I think starting off with blocking and tackling, like putting out or communicating to stakeholders in your organization what the expectations are, is really kind of just blocking and tackling, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so around maybe starting on, kind of the governance side. So we have a lot of, leaders of New Hampshire businesses in the state that are listening in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how should they be thinking about, making sure that they have, sure, not just like the executive buy-in and all those kinds of
Yeah,
things. I
yeah,
had a good conversation with Chris about that. But making sure from a security lens that, the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. And again, they're able to move forward in a secure way.
yeah. Well, I think it is creating that culture of experimentation, right, and enabling and fostering a, hey, we know this is here. You can't put blinders on,
Yeah.
right? So the more you kind of embrace it, and look, no one knows all the answers yet. So um, if you have an acceptable use policy in your IT department, or if it's a broader, a smaller organization, and you don't have those policies, just communicating those expectations to stakeholders in the organization.
In I guess like making that tangible for folks that are listening in is that, in your SharePoint or in your Drive or wherever, like, there's a data governance policy on, what's acceptable and what isn't within the organization.
Yeah, for example, in banking, right, there's an acceptable use policy,
Sure.
and it explicitly states what is allowed, what isn't allowed. I remember 15 years ago, um, you know, the debate of, and this was prior to COVID, right? The debate of BYOD and the mobile revolution, and you wanted to bring your mobile phone to work.
Yeah.
And a lot of financial institutions used to provide mobile phones. And then it became a question of like, why do I need to carry two devices? But you had to be explicit about
Yeah.
putting out that policy. Um, I actually worked on developing those structures for Citizens Bank,
Yeah.
right? And then rolling out that program, and we actually increased employee satisfaction, decreased cost, and managed the risk
Yeah.
by introducing some new technology. So, um, but that was one of those situations of like figure it out, right? And I think you have that same thing going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would be very curious on just your experience and your guidance around what have folks done wrong? Like what is there not to do as you're looking at starting to, like you said, take the first step and they're trying to be proactive, but what should they not do?
Well, it seems kind of obvious, right? But don't put your personal information into a free version of a chatbot, right? Um, and what is that? Any sort of PII data from a financial perspective, or personal health records like PHI data? That's probably something you
Yeah.
don't want to put out there. It's the stuff you kind of protect anyway, and you would think to protect any confidential information. Now you can also go buy a subscription, and then when you buy that subscription, make sure you're clear on what the rules are. Um, and I don't know if you've been following the news, but the recent negotiations between the U.S. government and Anthropic, versus how Anthropic handled it versus OpenAI.
Yep.
I don't know. I might, subscribe to Anthropic Claude
Yeah.
rather than OpenAI, given how they handled that situation.
Yeah, and I think what shocked me and honestly was encouraging about how many folks in the country are tuned in is for folks that didn't see, um, Claude actually passed OpenAI ChatGPT for the very first time right after that happened. So it
Yeah,
just goes to show you how much people, um, they
are,
realize how terrible,
are paying attention. And
Yeah,
then the other piece of it is, I mean, I use my kids as an awesome, test bed.
yeah,
They're doing all sorts of things, playing with all sorts of things, so they have a really interesting perspective and curiosity, right? So I think engaging people in understanding, and that's something that I think technology is such a it's an enabler, and there's no business process that that is not affected by IT, but it also isn't an IT thing, right? If it's the reason you have it is in service of the business, and ultimately, I think AI should be kind of treated the same way. Like, what is the business objective,
sure, yeah, yeah,
right? And that becomes the primary driver. Now, if we can drive things more effectively, more efficiently, or we can do things completely differently, I mean, that's awesome, right?
And as folks are looking at trying to tap into their, their organizational knowledge base,
Mhm.
a lot of folks are on Microsoft, right? And a lot of it's in SharePoint, maybe.
Yeah,
So they're trying to tap into their SOPs. They're trying to tap into just the wealth of knowledge that their organization has accumulated over
yeah,
doing business for many
yeah, yeah.
years. How should they look at um, really the governance of um, making sure that the right people have the right information and that there's not kind of overexposure
Well,
risk?
so I always think about it. You got to have that policy,
Yeah,
and that policy, that written documentation needs to be there, but it needs to be kind of thought of as a distributed engagement. So roles like business analysts and data analysts, and they really need to sit in the business. They need to be as close to the business as possible, and you're always striking a balance between kind of domain expertise around systems thinking and data analytics, um, coupled with business domain knowledge. And what I always want try to do is make sure that that's as close to the business as possible. And there's always this kind of balancing act of like, how much do you centralize, how much do you
yeah.
distribute? So it's really that governance framework needs to be um, central policies, and maybe some procedures. Um,
As opposed to just winging it or like, yeah,
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 right. And when I use terms like acceptable use policy or policy generally, it doesn't have to be a tone,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And what's beautiful is you can actually use AI to write it,
yeah,
and it's amazingly good.
yeah, yeah,
And you were touching on enterprise knowledge and institutional data. Um, you can easily have AI curate that data
Yeah.
into, what is the structure? Like define the structure, and then it's relatively easy to create a bot
Yeah.
that actually goes through all the data and then standardizes it. Now, you've probably heard the term hallucinations.
Sure. Yeah.
There's error that's going to occur. I love this. Friend of mine is building an AI based credit analysis platform, and the prospect that he was working with, they'd gone through a proof of concept and proven that their platform was 95% accurate.
Hmm.
And the prospect said, "Oh well, we can't deploy that because it's 5% error rate." And it was like, well, that's 95% improvement in your staffing model.
Yeah.
So,
And not to say that people don't ever make an occasional mistake too, right, Geoff?
correct.
Yeah.
But like a system is being held to a higher standard than
Yeah.
an analog device called a human being.
Yeah.
And it's like, really?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you take the win
It's a good point.
and then close that gap?
Yeah.
Right? Like use it to improve not only your existing process, your human process, but also, and then your humans actually get engaged in more engaging work.
Yeah.
Right? Like what, not the
The main and repeatable stuff, but the high leverage.
yeah, the Canadian fish counting,
There you go.
another fish, another
Yeah.
fish,
Yeah.
another fish.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's literally like really challenging, more analytical work, more complicated work, right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that I would think is more engaging.
Yeah. And so I think we talked about, how teams should be thinking about really maybe adopting, chatbots across the organization. How can they maybe, plug it into institutional knowledge and look at the governance of that,
Yeah.
having a policy. And I think that's all phenomenal. Now I want to talk a little bit about, agents that are being built within existing SaaS platforms that teams might be using. So QuickBooks, right? QuickBooks has just, they have some accounts payable stuff,
Sure.
a variety of other agents they've released. A lot of ERPs, Epicor, and others are starting to implement kind of baked in AI, so you don't need to go and get some new vendor. You can kind of have it in your ERP.
Yeah.
How do you look at that?
I mean, a lot of these tools have been like AI in the kind of the mass media is like this novel thing,
Yeah.
right? But augmented intelligence and machine learning has been around for years.
60s in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I mean,
Dartmouth. Yeah.
years and years and years. So what's now happening is you've got this, I kind of think of it as back in the early 90s when, this like, oh my God, the internet, it's huge, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is it's growing, growing so rapidly. And it was like, yeah, but it's been compounding since DARPA invented it in 1960, whatever.
Yeah.
And Tim Berners-Lee brought the graphical user interface to it. So it's like, yeah. And that analog is ChatGPT was released and all of a sudden it was accessible, right, to everybody.
Yeah.
And that's where we've got this like mass cultural shift about it.
Yeah.
But it's been around for years. The exciting thing is now you've got all sorts of long tail experimentation going on, and people are applying it in so many unbounded ways, which is creating all sorts of novel applications.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you manage that, right? And I think that's that governance piece.
Yeah.
And starting to kind of like, okay, how do we get this and apply it, and then have it applied in the service of the business outcome.
Absolutely. And for is there certain security considerations for tools that have already gone through the procurement process, right? Like, like your HubSpot or something, right? Like, and they're baking in AI. How do you think about the security exposure there?
So the thing that I worry about and what I my company is focused on is there's actually there's a gap in a window of exposure in the way AI is currently deployed, and it's actually true of any. So you've probably used the phrase like, oh, I went online.
Sure.
Well, I can assure you, you've never been online. I've never been online. I've used certain devices to go online,
Yeah.
and those devices are actually what are engaging with a digital system. And there's no chain of trust between me, the device, and the system. And that chain of trust needs to be closed, because what happens today is we authenticate after we connect to a system. And what we need to do is authenticate to connect, or pre-connection authentication to close that window. And we need to give identities to agents so that we can attribute what happens in a system to what device did it, so that we can then attribute that back to the real world ownership. And that's what my company is working on.
Got it. Um, and so we've talked about the chatbot, right, and
Yeah,
how to do
yeah.
that in a secure way. We've talked about maybe building agents and doing that in a secure way. Um, as teams are starting to look at building their own systems, like I was just talking to a company today where they've looked at 5 or 6 accounts payable solutions, but
Mhm.
and some have AI baked in, but they just don't work the exact way that they want to. As teams that are looking at maybe building their own agents or automations in house that can solve custom problems for their team,
Yeah,
um, how should they be looking at especially for a lot of organizations in the state may not be technical, right? They may not have like software teams on staff.
yeah.
How should they be looking at
So when I
adopting these
think when I
technologies?
think about that, right, it's core versus context, right? From a strategic standpoint, okay. Um, a decade, 2 decades ago, a lot of organizations went off and did a lot of custom development around um, accounting or various other things. And at the end of the day, you know, FP&A is FP&A, regardless of the industry you're in, really.
Hmm.
So you've seen a standardization and an adoption of commercial off the shelf software, and then you saw it come with SaaS-based solutions where there's no customization in
Or
that
very
SaaS,
little, right?
very
Yeah.
little, right?
Yeah.
But that's a good thing. It drives efficiency, it drives cost reduction, so your unit costs go down, and you can reallocate capital to what is core to your business and strategic, right? So all that contextual business process, HR, kind of what you think of as like, if you look at the P&L, right?
Yeah.
What's SG&A,
Yeah.
right? And what's profit and loss? And the things that are profit and loss, that's where maybe there's a case to be made about uh, build as opposed to buy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if it's contextual, uh, you know, SG&A costs, it's probably contextual to your business and should be a purchased
Yeah.
resource.
And so to that point about kind of the buy versus build and purchasing, what should see like you've been in the seat yourself,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
In
yeah.
the banking industry for a long time. What are a couple key questions that IT leaders should be thinking about, or just business leaders generally should be thinking about and be asking their, these AI vendors? Again, you've sat in that seat, so I think you have some great
Yeah,
insight there.
yeah. So I think if you're talking about data, I think ultimately it's data access and process, and so that data, you need to know where they're processing that data, and we kind of touched on don't use the freebie version,
Yeah.
because you don't know where they're processing it, from a data center perspective, a third party perspective, or a jurisdiction. So you really need to understand that. And, I think we're so used to just clicking through the terms and conditions. Certainly, when it's a business context, you want to really understand the terms and conditions under there.
Yeah.
Now, I think just like SaaS based subscriptions, there's very little negotiation, right?
Yeah.
So then it becomes a risk assessment for your organization. Right.
Yeah. And in terms of the role and dynamic that IT leaders should be playing, where I think you gave some great context around helping empower the organization and
Mhm.
around understanding the actual business needs, and so they can be that partner. um, how have IT leaders really had to flex the role that they do, where now they're almost being looked at as, in companies that are non-technical, they don't have CTOs necessarily, right? And so they're being looked at maybe a much wider scope of work than they might have been before.
Well, I think I kind of touched on this, and I really think it comes down to the fact that IT is in service of the business, and you really need to be focused on what are the business outcomes and how do we enable them.
Yeah.
And different businesses have different information intensity. So you touched on banking and financial services, you know, high information intensity. So CTOs, CIOs, chief information security officers play a much more active role in the, if we go back to the P&L, the cost of goods sold versus the SG&A,
Yeah.
as in compared to like a widgets business, right? You're much more in the SG&A side of things,
Sure.
really enabling the business,
Yeah.
not in the actual experience that's being delivered to the customer,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's it. That'll kind of shape how you play in the business.
Absolutely. And for teams that have, relatively limited
Mm.
technical resources, I think having like written policies was such a great point of guidance. Are there any other kind of tricks of the trade for organizations that may not have huge technical teams, where they can really get the most of, getting meaningful AI adoption, but within the confines of the resources that they have?
Well, I think it is that experimentation, and then I think there are there's great managed IT services partners. There's great consultancies. So there's a lot of people doing a lot of work in the business in this area. So um, I think that building an explicit plan, and just like you write the policy, you don't have to be the expert on everything.
Yeah.
It's finding those resources that you can rely on and build that trusted relationship with, that can help you. And I think sharing with peers is a great way to find, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And maybe in a proximate but not identical business, if that's a way to kind of see what other people are doing.
Yeah. Geoff, no, I think this has been fantastic. Final thing we'll close with here is, if you have any additional guidance or any input, as a guy who spent a lot of time leading leading teams and leading organizations around how teams should be looking at AI adoption. I think you've given us such a wealth of information, but I didn't know if there's anything else you want to leave with
Well,
folks watching.
I think the first thing, the most important thing is people go out and get familiar with AI,
Yeah,
right?
totally
Because
agreed.
it is like mind opening, the capabilities. And I during the holidays I went and like used chat gpt, to like understand, just like supplements,
Yeah.
like, and what are they, and what are the best ones to apply to a particular problem. So it's amazing the things you can get access to.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen, like, with like Google, you do a Google search and now you get a generative AI response ahead of the like paid advertising,
Yeah.
right? And it's so like that.
A lot of times I'll just look at that at this
Yeah, I
point.
mean,
Yeah.
it's really cool
Yeah.
how, and you can just get into this. I mean, it does become a bit of a rabbit hole. You can go,
For sure. Yeah.
down, but if you're intellectually curious, it can be really fascinating. So,
Awesome. Geoff, this has been fantastic. If folks want to find more about Identity Plus, your business, and how you're helping companies secure agents, where should they find you?
Identity.plus, at www.identity.plus, and I'm Geoff, Geoff, at identity.plus.
Awesome. Thank you for doing this, man.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right.
Cheers.
Cheers.